Human and chimpanzee. So alike, yet so different. We've always wondered about them. We don't know if they wonder about us. How did life come up with the two of us? The answer is shocking. It was all a big mistake, or rather, a lot of little mistakes. Mistake piled on mistake, generation after generation. Enough to make two species from what, millions of years ago, was one. Because errors fuel the most profound of life's secrets, its ability to change, to adapt, to evolve. It was Charles Darwin, of course, who came up with this extraordinary idea of evolution. The notion that over time, life can change, sometimes so much that eventually brand new species emerge, came from the Victorians' fascination with variation in nature. Here's a favorite example from those times. These African butterflies are all the same species, but there's a lot of variation in their wing patterns. Darwin's insight was that differences like this between individuals of the same species could be the raw material for making new species. Life started out, he argued, as something very simple. By piling tiny difference on tiny difference, life branched out over billions of generations into hundreds of millions of species, including the 30 million that share our planet today. Brilliant though Darwin's insight was, he had a problem. He didn't know how the tiny differences between individuals his theory needed arose, nor how they were passed on from one generation to the next. But then, he'd never heard of DNA. DNA is the molecule Darwin needed. It carries the instructions for making all living things in a simple code based on 4 chemicals that have different shapes. These chemicals are known by their initials as C, G, A, and T. It takes millions, even billions of letters to spell out a living creature. And every time one cell divides to make 2, all its DNA must be duplicated. This is how the instructions for a living thing get passed from one generation to the next. It's in this copying of DNA's instructions that the key to evolution lies, the source of the differences that fuel change. Because the copying isn't perfect, with billions of letters to copy, inevitably mistakes get made. These mistakes, random errors, are called mutations. Now, in the movies, as in most other popular culture, mutations are usually the stuff of nightmares. In the 1950s Warner Brothers classic Them, for instance, mutant ants were created when radiation from an atom bomb altered their DNA. As usual, the mutants are depicted as monstrous and homicidal, and they end up being destroyed so that we can go on living. But this portrayal really isn't very fair, because without mutations, we wouldn't be here today. Without mutations, life couldn't exist. Mutations have been shaping life since it began.
We can't return to the early Earth to find out how, but we can do the next best thing. 6 million years ago, just yesterday in Earth's history, lava began boiling up from the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It was the birth of a whole new world in miniature, the island chain of Hawaii. Thousands of miles from the nearest land, Hawaii, like the Earth itself, began as barren, lifeless rock. But one day, it was discovered. Life arrived. Insects borne by the wind or floating logs. Seeds brought by birds. Because all these plants and animals came here by accident from someplace else, most found their new home strikingly different from their old. But it was make do or die. Today, Hawaii is brimming with life. The secret of its success lay in mutations. Mutations that allowed the early pioneers to change to meet the demands of their new home. This is the story of one such pioneer, a single seed dropped by a passing bird some 2 million years ago. It's the story of how that seed became in Hawaii's virgin spaces the founder of an extraordinary botanical dynasty. It's a story that has long fascinated biologists and that dramatically demonstrates the power of mutations to allow life to survive almost anywhere.
This is really an exceptional flower for a crater rim, huh?
Yeah, it's nice that Djibouti and Argyrophyllum are flowering at the same time this year.
I hope we find some hybrids along the lip here so we won't go down in the crater.
Yeah, it'd be good. Most of them are down on that saddle between.
This is the rim of Haleakala Crater on the island of Maui, one of the highest, hottest, and driest places on the planet.
All right.
And this is Hawaii's state plant,
Fantastic.
the 8-foot-high silver sword, one of evolution's most sensational creations. It produces its spectacular tower of flowers just once before dying.
Smokes, that makes the whole day.
The silver sword is perfectly adapted to its uncomfortable home. Its angled silvery leaves reflect away the unremitting sun. And as this instrument will show, the leaves have another property that helps them keep cool. Despite the dryness, they give off a lot of water. University of Arizona biologist Rob Robichaud.
The potential benefit to silver swords of such a high rate of water loss is analogous to the cooling effect that your body feels when you step out of a shower and you're covered with moisture evaporating from your skin. That, coupled with the dense hairiness of these leaf surfaces and the steep angles that you see, especially in the younger individuals, help it to maintain a leaf temperature that's comparable to the air here. The soil, in contrast, that has none of those mechanisms of dissipating heat can reach a temperature 20 to 30 degrees C above the ambient air.
So in the 2 million years since its ancestral seed arrived, the silver sword has settled down beautifully here on the crater rim. But this isn't the only place the silver sword's ancestor found itself a home. For a small chain of islands, Hawaii has an immense range of environments. And it's here in the wet regions of the island of Kauai that another descendant of the silver sword's ancestral seed has managed to fit itself in.
Bruce, how far do you think it is to that plant?
I think it's right up here in this opening coming up.
No, that should be less than 100 yards then.
Yeah.
Before biologists Gary Carr and Bruce Baldwin can find it, they have to clear some brush.
Get through these introduced weeds.
Since human settlers introduced foreign plants to Hawaii over the last 200 years, some have almost completely taken over. But hidden among these recent arrivals is a plant that, despite its looks, descended from the very same seed that gave rise to the silver sword.
Doesn't look too much like a silver sword to you, does it?
About as different as you could imagine based on the
This
leaves.
plant's leaves are green, not silver. It produces no spectacular flowers, and its friendly sprawl contrasts with the silver sword's aloof
A
elegance.
nice little pocket of it here in this clearing.
Incredible. How large do you think this plant is, Jerry?
I don't know. Looks like it's over 6 feet here, 8 feet or so, and back behind it gets up to about
It's as
10
well
feet.
suited to its shady, wet environment as the silver sword is to its crater rim.
This plant is adapted by having this sprawling habit extensively branched, which brings its leaves up into openings in the canopy. And these leaves are displayed flat to the sun. These leaves are broad and flat, unlike the triangular leaves of the silver sword. And they're not covered by hairs. These leaves are completely hairless, allowing it to absorb a maximum amount of light.
Biologists have long known this plant is a kissing cousin of the silver sword because they will breed with each other to produce hybrids. But its leaves will reveal just how close the relationship is, because from them can be extracted DNA. When the DNA codes are read, it turns out the instructions to make each plant are almost identical. The coding differences are the result of a few different mutations that have accumulated in each plant since they went their separate ways. But mutations haven't produced just 2 variations on an original theme. There are over 24, including a vine, the green sword, and even a 30-foot tree. All these varieties are the products of different sets of mutations that have accumulated over the 2 million years since the seed that founded the whole family arrived. The differences are enough that the plants are on the brink of becoming separate species. It's this process, one species branching out through mutations to become many, that has repeated itself over and over again since life on Earth began.
In a sense, we get the impression that under favorable conditions, in what is essentially a crucible for evolution, almost anything is possible. You really get the feeling that you're seeing the diversification of life in its most basic form. You have plants growing in environments as spectacular as Haleakala Crater. On the dry side, we have such views as this. You can fly over to the wet forest, and you almost have a sense that you're experiencing evolution in action.
Like all living things, we human beings have been molded by the same forces that shaped the silver sword. When the first silver sword seed landed in Hawaii 2 million years ago, the human species was just beginning to emerge as a small group of individuals living in Africa. As the silver sword spread across Hawaii, so we spread around the world. And like the silver sword, we began to look different in different places. In the tropics, for instance, people developed dark skin, perhaps as protection against sunlight. In gloomier climates, light skin lets through more sunlight, probably to help manufacture an essential vitamin. And in the cold climates of northern Asia, people have fatty eyelids. Maybe this protected my ancestors' eyes from freezing. The fact is, we don't really know. Our explanations are mostly guesses. But we do know the differences between races must have begun with mutations. And we know of one mutation that's still affecting evolution today.
The story starts with a gene, a single instruction written in the 4 letters of the genetic code. A gene can be thousands of letters long. If we wrote out on paper all the genes it takes to spell out a human, this is what we'd get. 23 pairs of very long drawers, representing our 23 pairs of chromosomes. There are 100,000 genes in here, 6 billion letters altogether, carrying all the instructions